We've just finished installing crown molding in this room, and now it's time to get started on our chair rail. Installing chair rail is one of the easiest projects you'll ever do. However, this room is going to throw us a bit of a curveball. So let's take a look at it, because you may encounter the same challenge in your own home. So here's the challenge. Typically, you want to pick chair rail that isn't thicker than the existing door trim. But I really want to use this FM 5538 molding because of its nice profile, so we'll have to do some tricks to incorporate it into the door trim. But it will look fantastic when we're done. We'll show you how to get around this challenge later, but first let's go over some basics for our project. In order to determine how much molding is needed, we take measurements of each section of wall in the room. We'll be sure to exclude any doorways, closets, and windows because we don't need material to cover these areas. For this project, we're going to use 5 of our 8-foot long sticks of molding to make the 16 pieces needed for the full room. Before we make our first cut, let's take a quick look at where the right side of our first piece is going to end at this radius corner. With a corner like this, we could turn it with a single piece. However, I prefer to use a small transition piece, which leaves a smaller gap to caulk. Plus, it adds more character to the room. Okay, let's go outside and get to work. For this project, we'll be using the bevel feature of our compound saw. All of our cuts will be made with our molding flat on the saw. You can also install chair rail with just a standard miter saw. To do so, just position your molding flat against the fence like this. The left end of our first piece butts up against our window, so no cut is necessary. Checking our cheat sheet, with the right side going into a 135-degree corner with transition piece, we'll set our bevel angle to 11 1/4 degrees, and we'll make our cut. The leftover scrap from my first cut is just long enough for piece number 3, so let's go ahead and cut it. Both sides are going into a transition piece, so we'll leave the bevel angle at 11 1/4 degrees. For the left side, we're going to have the bottom of our chair rail against the fence and make the cut. For the right side cut, we'll flip it over, mark our measurement, and then cut it with the top of the molding against the fence. Okay, now for piece number 2, the transition piece between 1 and 3. The bevel angle remains the same, so we make the cut on the right side by holding the top of the molding against the fence and just cutting off a small sliver. We'll flip our piece around and now position it with the bottom of the molding up against the saw, mark it at 1 inch, and make our cut. The piece should look just like this, with the front narrower than the back. Piece number 4 is identical, so we'll just do the same thing all over again. Piece number 5 is a full length. The left side will butt up against our transition piece, so we're going to hold the piece with the bottom of the molding up against the fence and cut it at the same 11 1/4 degree bevel angle. The wall is longer than our molding, so the right side of piece 5 will need to butt up against another piece. The molding is very uniform, so we just make a butt joint because it's easier and will look great when we're all finished. To get a clean joint, we're going to trim just 1/16 of an inch off the end with our bevel angle at 0 degrees. All right, now let's head inside and install these 5 pieces. Before installing any of our pieces, we mark on the wall where the top of our molding will come up to. Then, just like our crown molding project, we add adhesive on the back to reduce the number of nails needed, which ultimately decreases the amount of finish work required. We're using 1 1/4 inch brads, and we'll keep the PSI setting on our air compressor between 70 and 100. With adhesive on our first piece, we press firmly to the wall, align the top of the molding with our marks, making sure our piece is level, then shoot a nail in every 12 inches. On our transition, we're going to add adhesive on the edges that touch piece 1 and 3 and nail it in place. We add adhesive to our third piece, butt it up against the transition, align it to our marks, and nail it in place. Don't worry about any gaps in your corners. When we do our finish caulking and painting, these will disappear. We install our fourth piece, the small transition, and then install piece number 5. The final piece we need on this wall is 22 and 9/16 inches. Let's go back outside and cut this piece plus piece number 7. The left side of piece 6 is going to butt up against piece 5, so we'll start by just cutting off a hair from the end to give it a nice clean joint. The right side of this piece is going into an inside 90-degree corner. Looking at our cheat sheet, we set our bevel at 45 degrees, and the top of our molding should be up against the fence, and we make our cut. Anytime you're going around an inside corner of a room, the back of the molding should always be longer than the front, and you can see some of the exposed profile. That's how you know you're doing it right. Piece number 7 is a full length. The left side is going into that 90-degree corner. So let's start by flipping the molding around so the bottom is touching the fence, and we're going to make our cut. All right, now the right side will butt up against piece 8, so we're going to set our bevel back to 0, and we're going to cut off just a little slice so that we have a nice clean fit. We add adhesive to pieces 6 and 7, align the top of the moldings to our marks, and then nail them in place. We're ready for piece 8, and if you remember, the door trim is narrower than our chair rail. We'll see how some of the polyurethane is exposed. So what we're going to do is extend part of the chair rail over the casing and then return it back into the door. Now, let's go get the pieces cut, and then you'll see what I mean. Let's start with the end of the chair rail that touches the door casing. Our door casing is 5/8 of an inch thick, so I'm going to put a mark at that measurement on our chair rail because we're only going to cut that deep into it. We set our saw at the 45-degree bevel angle. We position the molding flat on the saw with the bottom touching the fence, and then just cut to our mark on the molding. Now take a coping saw and cut from the back to remove part of the molding. This allows you to slide it over the door frame. You can see now how our molding fits up against the door frame. There is a piece, however, that is still missing. We'll cut that in just a moment. But first, mark piece 8 where it will butt up against piece 7 and cut it to fit. For the small return piece, we'll have our saw set at 45 degrees and just cut all the way through the molding. Then we'll set our bevel back at 0 degrees. We've measured our gap, and it's 1/2 inch. We're going to transfer that measurement over to our molding and make our cut. This is it. We can use just a little adhesive, put our return in place, and the piece is finished. We use the same cutting process to make piece 9, piece 10, and piece 11. We're now at our bullnose corner. To give this step a professional look, use a small transition piece between pieces 12 and 14. From installing our crown molding earlier in this room, we know that the transition piece for a 90-degree bullnose is 83% of the radius, or in our case, 5/8 of an inch. For piece 12, measure to where the wall starts to curve, and then add to that measurement half of the length of our transition piece, or 5/16 of an inch. We do this because piece 12 must extend beyond the curve before it hits our transition piece. And we do the same thing when taking our measurements for piece 14. On the left side of piece 12 is an inside 90-degree corner, so we're going to set our bevel angle at 45 degrees, Position our molding with the bottom touching the fence, and we'll make our cut. After marking our measurements on the molding, we're going to make the cut on the right side of our molding, which is for the outside 90 degree with bull nose. We set our saw to the 22.5 degree miter angle. We position our molding with the bottom touching the fence, and we make our cut. For our transition piece, we keep the bevel at 22.5 degrees and make our first cut. We then flip the molding over and cut it a second time. The final size of the back part of the molding will be 5/8 of an inch. Our finished piece should look like this. Since it's for an outside corner, the front of the molding will be longer than the back. For piece 14, we repeated the process on the right side to make it wrap around the door trim. Now on the left side, we'll cut it to length with our saw back at the 22.5 degree bevel angle. Now we align these three pieces and install them with adhesive and nails. Okay, we've arrived at our final corner. I've already cut the two pieces, so let's take a look at them. For the piece that touches the door trim, we made that special cut on the left side. For the right side, it's going into a 90 degree corner, so we just made a 45 degree bevel cut. Okay, now our second piece has a 45 degree bevel cut on the left side because it's going into that 90 degree corner as well. On the right side, it's just a straight cut because it's butting up against the window. We nail these two pieces and we are finished. And remember, any gaps you might have, we can clean up during the finish work. In a room like this, we had a lot of extra cuts because of our various corners and the thin door trim. Once you get accustomed to making the cuts, a project like this will only take about 2 hours for the installation portion. Most simple rectangular rooms can be installed in less than an hour. Now, for more how-to videos that will help you give your house an amazing new look using our uDecor molding, go to uDecor.com.